What if I told you one of the most precise stone structures on Earth was built without iron, without wheels, and over 1,400 years ago? High in the Bolivian Andes, at an altitude where most visitors need days just to catch their breath, lies a stone that shouldn't exist. Run your hand along its edge and you'll find a groove so straight, so mathematically consistent, that laser cutting is the first comparison most engineers reach for. No steel touched this rock. No wheel moved it, and the people credited with carving it left behind no written language to explain how they did it. For nearly 5 centuries, since a Spanish chronicler first stumbled onto these ruins in 1549 and asked the locals who built them, the answer has stayed unsettlingly the same. It was already ancient when their own ancestors arrived. Today, we can date the stone precisely. We still can't fully explain the mind that shaped it. By the end of this, you'll understand not just how impossible this monument looks, but why the true explanation is stranger and more human than any myth invented to replace it. This is Puma Punku, the gateway of the Puma, part of the ancient Tiwanaku complex on Bolivia's high plateau. Stand among its ruins and scale itself becomes disorienting. Some of the andesite blocks here weigh more than 80 tons, heavier than a loaded freight truck, quarried from sites kilometers away and somehow hauled uphill, through terrain with no wheeled transport and no draft animal strong enough to pull that kind of weight. The stone itself is nearly as hard as steel, and carved into its surface are shapes so identical, so precisely repeated, that they interlock like machine-milled components, as though someone photocopied a groove in solid rock. Drilled holes, barely wider than a finger, sink into the andesite in flawless straight lines, walls smooth enough to catch the light evenly along their length. Stand close enough, and you start doing what generations of visitors have done before you. Quietly wondering whether human hands really made this. That wondering has a long, complicated history, and it's worth being honest about where it went wrong. Through the 20th century, as archaeologists studied the H-shaped blocks and the eerily uniform drill holes, a louder narrative grew alongside them, that no ancient civilization could have achieved this without outside help, lost technology, or visitors from beyond Earth. It's a story that solves the mystery by removing humans from it entirely, but it collapses the moment you actually try to test it. Experimental archaeologists have spent years attempting to replicate Tiwanaku stonework using only tools that would have existed at the time. A reed or wooden shaft, spun by hand with wet sand as an abrasive, bores through andesite, leaving exactly the pattern found at Puma Punku. The same tapering, the same concentric wear marks left by rotation and grit rather than any rotating engine. Hammerstones, harder than the andesite itself, can dress a surface flat through nothing more advanced than skill and repetition. The tools weren't extraordinary. What was extraordinary was the discipline behind them. But then archaeologists discovered something that changed everything. When Alexei Vranich began digitally reconstructing the site, matching thousands of scattered stone fragments like pieces of a vast jigsaw, he uncovered a pattern nobody expected. The blocks weren't carved individually, each to its own improvised design. They were built in matching, modular units, sections shaped separately to shared specifications, then assembled on-site like standardized components. That's not primitive trial and error. That's something closer to architectural mass production, appearing in the Andes centuries before anything resembling it existed anywhere else on Earth. A society without metal tools, without the wheel, without writing, had independently arrived at an idea we now associate with modern factories. To understand why anyone would attempt this, you have to step back from the stones and meet the civilization behind them. Puma Punku was the ceremonial core of Tiwanaku, a culture that radiocarbon dating consistently places under construction between roughly 500 and 600 AD, centuries before the Inca Empire even existed. That single fact quietly overturns one of the most common assumptions visitors bring with them. This was not built by the Inca. By the time Inca power rose in the region, Tiwanaku had already collapsed, its monuments abandoned for generations, its engineering knowledge surviving only in fragments absorbed by later cultures. Building at this scale meant organizing thousands of laborers at an altitude where growing enough food to feed them is a daily struggle. Coordinating quarrying, transport, and carving across years, possibly decades. Someone convinced an entire society that hauling 80-ton stones across a freezing plateau was worth every calorie it cost. That's not a puzzle about lost technology. That's a puzzle about belief, ambition, and staggering human organization. Here is where fact and legend genuinely part ways, and it's worth knowing why the legend took hold in the first place. In the 1920s, an Austrian engineer named Arthur Poznański studied astronomical alignments at the site and proposed that Puma Punku might be over 15,000 years old, built before agriculture, before almost every marker of civilization we recognize. It's a thrilling idea, and it still circulates widely today. But stratigraphy, radiocarbon dating, and ceramic sequencing, independent methods converging on the same answer, place construction firmly in the 6th century AD. Poznański's methods have since been challenged repeatedly by archaeologists and astronomers alike. So why does his theory persist? Because a forgotten super-civilization, erased by time, is simply a better story than a skilled, disciplined Andean society solved an extraordinarily hard engineering problem using patience. Legends rarely survive because they're well evidenced. They survive because they're satisfying. And the truth here, less cinematic as it is actually the more remarkable claim. Because it means people did this. Not gods, not visitors. People, standing where you're standing, breathing air a third thinner than what you're used to. There's one more thread worth following, because it's stranger than anything invented to replace it. A small number of researchers have proposed that some Tiwanaku surfaces weren't only carved but chemically softened first, using mineral compounds, based on unusual textures found under magnification, an idea that echoes old oral traditions describing stones that could be made soft. It's a genuinely intriguing hypothesis. It's also tested on a small number of samples, and it hasn't displaced the far better supported explanation. Hand tools, immense coordinated labor, and generations of inherited stoneworking skill passed down without ever being written. Real investigation doesn't shout down curiosity to reach a tidy ending. It tests every explanation against the evidence and lets the strongest one stand, even when it's the less thrilling one, which leads to the discovery quietly buried underneath this whole story, not a hidden chamber, not a suppressed technology, but a hidden assumption we brought with us. For a century, the impossibility of Puma Punku said less about the people who built it than about us. We assumed precision and standardization could only arrive with metal, or writing, or the wheel. That sophistication only ever looks one way. Puma Punku proves otherwise. It stands as evidence that a civilization at the edge of livable altitude, without a single tool we'd call advanced, could still think in blueprints, standardize its architecture, and build something engineered to outlast memory. The blocks still lie scattered across that plateau, exactly as Cieza de Leon found them nearly 500 years ago.